I didn't ask for much. My life had its routine, a routine I had come to rely on like the ticking of a dependable clock. I worked long hours at the office, came home to dinner on the table, and tried to keep things simple between us. We weren't perfect, sure, but what marriage ever is? I thought we were steady enough, predictable, safe. Then, 2 weeks ago, she volunteered for that community cleanup project. It's only on weekends, she'd said, and I hadn't given it much thought. I figured it was good for her. Lisa liked to be around people, always had. Me, I preferred my peace and quiet, which made the arrangement seem ideal at first. She'd spend her Saturday mornings at the park, planting trees and organizing donation drives, while I caught up on sports or took a well-earned nap. The first weekend passed without incident. She came home with dirt on her shoes, flushed cheeks, and an energy that was oddly contagious. I thought she was just happy to be doing something productive outside of the house. By the second weekend, she'd started mentioning her coworkers, specifically a man named Connor. It wasn't a big deal at first, just casual mentions of how Connor was great at organizing the volunteers or how Connor brought the team coffee to keep them going. But by the third weekend, I noticed she was glued to her phone more often, laughing at texts while I sat in the same room like a piece of furniture she'd forgotten was there. I wasn't the paranoid type, but something about the way she held her phone close to her chest made me uneasy. I asked her who she was texting, and she brushed it off, saying it was the volunteer group chat about next week's event. I let it slide, or at least I pretended to. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the flickering TV screen without really watching. My gut told me something was wrong, and when you've been married long enough, you learn to trust those instincts. I'd installed a monitoring app on her phone a while ago, not because I didn't trust her then, but because I wanted to know she was safe when she worked late. It wasn't something I'd ever needed to use, but tonight my finger hovered over the app icon for longer than I'd like to admit. When I finally opened it, there was a notification waiting for me like a loaded gun. A message log flagged for amorous subtext. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. Instead, I felt something colder, sharper, like ice running through my veins. I tapped the notification, and the conversation unfolded like a script in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Lisa, thanks for making today fun. I don't know what I'd do without you. Connor, you bring the fun, Lisa. I'm just here to keep up. Lisa, you do more than that. Don't let me start listing all the ways you've been amazing. Connor, maybe you could show me instead of telling me? Lisa, don't tempt me. It wasn't explicit, not yet. But the undertone was unmistakable. Two people circling each other, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push without crashing through the fragile walls they'd built. I didn't read further. I didn't need to. That one exchange was enough to detonate the entire foundation of my marriage. I sat there in the glow of the phone screen, feeling something dark and ugly rise inside me. Hatred, jealousy, but most of all, the need to do something to break the silence before it broke me. In that moment, I knew exactly what needed to happen. There would be no quiet confrontation, no sitting down over coffee to talk things through. There would be a storm, and Lisa wouldn't see it coming. Morning light spilled through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the bedroom. I sat at the edge of the bed, watching her sleep, peaceful like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just buried a knife between my ribs with those texts. I wondered how long she would have kept up this act if I hadn't seen it. Days? Weeks? Maybe forever, until the guilt gnawed her into confessing, or until Connor pushed her over the edge. Her phone was on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I didn't need it anymore. I already knew what I needed to know. She stirred, eyelids fluttering open as she stretched lazily. "You're up early," she mumbled, voice heavy with sleep. I didn't answer. My silence must have registered as odd, because she blinked a few times and sat up, brushing her hair back. "What's wrong?" she asked. The audacity of that question sent a spark of anger shooting through me, igniting everything I'd been holding back. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor as I pushed it back. My heart thumped, but it wasn't from panic. It was from the boiling rage that had been simmering all night. "You tell me, Lisa," I said, my tone flat but heavy. "Anything you want to come clean about?" Her brow furrowed, confusion, maybe feigned, maybe real, washing over her face. What are you talking about? I didn't give her time to play dumb. Connor, the messages, the flirting, all of it. I could see the moment the truth hit her. Her face drained of color, and her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Her hands twisted the bedsheet nervously. It's not what you think. Don't. I raised a hand to stop her. Don't insult me by pretending this is nothing. I read the messages, Lisa. I saw everything. She scrambled out of bed, barefoot on the cold floor as she reached for me, but I stepped back, keeping the distance between us like a barricade. Please, she pleaded. Let me explain. Explain what? I snapped. How you were planning to show him instead of telling him. Or were you hoping I'd be clueless long enough for things to get worse? Her breath hitched, tears welling up in her eyes. But they didn't move me. Not this time. Tears couldn't fix what she'd broken. I wasn't going to do anything, she whispered, voice cracking. It was just stupid texts. I swear. Stupid texts. As if those words didn't have the power to destroy. I turned away from her, pacing the room to keep from exploding further. My fists clenched at my sides as the tidal wave of jealousy and betrayal crashed over me. I saw them in my mind. Her and Connor laughing, whispering, sharing something that was supposed to be ours. My marriage, my wife, stolen by a man who probably didn't even care about the damage he'd caused. She tried again, her voice desperate now. It didn't mean anything. I love you. Please believe me. I whirled around, the force of my movement making her flinch. Love me? You love me? If this is love, then what's betrayal, Lisa? She sobbed quietly, shoulders shaking, but I didn't care. My hatred had taken root, and the only thing keeping me steady was the knowledge that I had the power to end this. I wouldn't be the man who sat back and let someone else walk all over him. We can fix this, she begged. I'll quit the project. I won't talk to him again. We can go to therapy. Please don't do this. No, I said firmly, cutting her off. I'm done. I'm not going to live with this shadow hanging over me, wondering if you're telling the truth or waiting for the next betrayal. She dropped to her knees, clinging to me. Please don't leave me. I can fix this. I'll do anything. I stared down at her, numb to the sight. I didn't care how pathetic she looked, begging on the floor. It wasn't enough. Nothing she said or did could erase what she'd done. We're done, I repeated, pulling myself free from her grip. Pack your things. You're leaving today. Her sobs grew louder, filling the room like an orchestra of regret, but I walked out without looking back. There was no place for pity here, no room for reconciliation. Lisa had crossed the line, and once you cross it, there's no going back. Let her cry. Let her feel it, because by the time the door shut behind her, I would be free. At least, that's what I told myself. When I heard the front door shut behind her, the silence felt deafening. The kind of silence that clings to your skin, suffocating you with its weight. I stood in the hallway, staring at the door like it was some portal that had just sucked away the last decade of my life. Her bags were packed in a rush, and I didn't care if she left anything behind. I wanted her gone. She tried to linger, hoping her tears would break me, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a second glance. The sound of the car starting outside felt like a victory I couldn't celebrate. I wandered aimlessly through the house. Our house. The kitchen still smelled like coffee. Her half-full mug sat on the counter next to the plate of toast she hadn't touched. I grabbed the plate and chucked it in the sink, watching it shatter into pieces. My breath was steady, my mind blank except for the growing realization that this place felt different now. The couch still had her throw blanket draped over the side, the one she always used when we watched TV together. I snatched it up and tossed it into the closet, slamming the door shut like I could lock away her presence, lock away the memories that gnawed at me like a stray dog chewing on a bone. The living room was the worst. The wedding photo above the fireplace seemed to mock me, Lisa's smile frozen in time, forever happy in a moment that didn't belong to us anymore. I yanked the frame off the wall and flipped it face down on the coffee table. I didn't smash it. I wasn't that dramatic, but I couldn't stand to see it. I sat down and pulled out my phone. Notifications blinked at me. Work emails, reminders for errands, and one final notification from the monitoring app. The app, the thing that had pulled back the curtain and revealed the ugly truth, now felt like a weapon I had no use for anymore. I deleted it. I didn't need to see any more messages. I already knew what they meant. I let my imagination fill in the blanks. Lisa meeting Connor in secret, whispering things to him that she hadn't whispered to me in years. It didn't matter if they'd done it yet, or if they were just waiting for the right moment. The intent was there, and that was enough. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my lawyer. I didn't hesitate. The phone rang twice before he answered, his voice gruff like he'd been woken up too early. "I need to file for divorce," I said, skipping the pleasantries. There was a pause, then the rustling of papers on the other end. "You sure about this?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm sure." It wasn't a decision I needed time to consider. I knew, as sure as I knew my own name, that there was no fixing what Lisa and I had. Even if she begged, even if she promised me the world, I'd never trust her again. I gave him the details, and he told me he'd start the paperwork. When the call ended, I felt a strange sense of relief. Like the first step had been taken, and there was no turning back. But relief didn't mean peace. Not yet. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Images flashed through my mind. Lisa at the volunteer project, laughing with Connor, texting him late at night while I was asleep beside her. My jaw clenched as I thought about how easy it must have been for her to betray me under the guise of doing something good. I wondered if Connor had a wife, if she was sitting at home clueless like I had been. I didn't even know what the guy looked like. All I knew was his name and the role he'd played in ripping my life apart. I wasn't the type to hunt him down, but that didn't stop the fantasies from creeping in. I imagined showing up at the volunteer site, catching them off guard, watching the smug look on Connor's face disappear when he realized I knew everything. But what would that solve? It wouldn't erase the texts or undo the damage. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to let go of the fantasy. I wasn't going to give Connor the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under my skin. I stood up and paced the room again, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The house was too quiet now, too empty. The silence reminded me of what I'd lost, and I hated it. I needed noise, distraction, something to drown out the thoughts spiraling in my head. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the door, locking it behind me like I was sealing away a chapter of my life I'd never reopen. Where I was going, I didn't know. I just needed to be anywhere but here. I drove aimlessly, taking turns without a destination in mind, letting the hum of the engine be the only sound in my world. Outside, the morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing a gray sky that matched the mood clinging to me like a second skin. I passed familiar streets, our favorite coffee shop, the park where we'd walked hand in hand when life felt simpler. I gripped the wheel tighter, willing those memories to fade. It wasn't working. Lisa's face haunted me like a ghost trapped in the rearview mirror, always there, always watching. I could still see the look of panic on her face when I confronted her, the tears streaming down her cheeks as she begged me to listen. Maybe if she'd shown that desperation before Connor entered the picture, we wouldn't be here. But that wasn't how life worked. You only realize what you've taken for granted when it's slipping through your fingers. I stopped at a red light and stared blankly ahead. A couple jogged across the crosswalk, their arms brushing against each other with that casual intimacy that comes from years of trust. I looked away. Trust? What a joke. I thought I'd had it, thought I'd build a life on it. Turns out, trust is only as strong as the lies it hasn't uncovered. The light turned green, but I didn't move right away. A car behind me honked, jolting me back to reality. I pressed the gas pedal and kept going, but my mind stayed stuck in reverse, replaying everything I could have done differently. Was there a moment I missed, a sign that could have warned me before things spiraled out of control? I pulled into the parking lot of a diner I hadn't been to in years, the kind of place with worn leather booths and the smell of bacon grease that clings to your clothes. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe, one of the few places left that hadn't been tainted by Lisa's betrayal. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered black coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd seen her share of broken men. She didn't ask questions, just nodded and left me with the comfort of silence. The coffee was bitter, but I welcomed the taste. I needed something sharp to cut through the fog in my head. As I stared into the cup, My phone buzzed on the table. Her name lit up the screen like a warning flare. I didn't answer. A minute later, another text appeared. Please talk to me. I am Sora. Just give me a chance to explain. Explain? I'd given her that chance, and she'd squandered it with half-truths and excuses. What could she possibly say now that would change anything? But the text kept coming. I love you. Don't do this. Please, I'll do anything. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to respond. Hatred burned in my chest, but beneath it, jealousy simmered, poisoning everything it touched. I could picture her texting me while Connor's name was still saved in her contacts, still waiting to be used the next time she needed him. I slammed the phone face down on the table, blocking out the notifications. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into thinking there was hope. There wasn't. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. The waitress returned with a plate of eggs and toast, though I couldn't remember ordering it. On the house, she said softly, like she knew. I didn't argue. I nodded my thanks and stared at the food, appetite nowhere to be found. Outside, the rain began to fall, just a light drizzle, the kind that fogs up windows and makes everything feel heavier than it already is. I watched droplets race down the glass, my mind racing with them. I thought about the lawyer, the paperwork, the house that would soon feel like a stranger's space once Lisa was legally out of my life. The thought of her moving on, possibly with Connor, gnawed at me. I hated that man, hated the way he'd slipped into my life like a thief and stolen what I thought was mine. But deep down, I hated her more for opening the door and inviting him in. My phone buzzed again, and this time, curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it over and saw the message that finally made my pulse spike. I need to tell you something about Connor. Please answer. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as a wave of unease settled over me. This wasn't another apology. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. There was something different about it, something urgent. Against my better judgment, I opened the message. But before I could read the rest, the phone vibrated again with an incoming call from her. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something stopped me. What could she possibly have to say now? What could be so important that she was still trying to reach me, even after I'd made it clear we were done? I answered, but I didn't say a word. Just silence on my end, waiting for her to fill it. Thank you for picking up, she said, her voice shaky. I know you don't want to talk to me, but there's something you need to know. It's about Connor. My grip tightened on the phone. What about him? There was a pause, followed by a deep breath. He's not who you think he is. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the screen, her final words echoing in my head like a riddle I couldn't solve. He's not who you think he is. My thumb hovered over the call button, tempted to redial, but I stopped myself. What was this supposed to be? Some last-ditch effort to spin the narrative? A way to shift the blame off her and dump it all on Connor? But something about the way she said it stuck with me. I could hear it in her voice, real fear, not just regret. Fear isn't something you fake easily, not when you've known someone as long as I'd known Lisa. I pushed my plate aside and tossed a few bills on the table, then grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. The rain had picked up, soaking me the second I stepped outside, but I barely noticed. My mind was elsewhere, racing through scenarios I didn't have answers to. What did you mean by not who you think he is? Was Connor dangerous? Married? Someone with a history of wrecking other people's lives? As much as I hated her right now, I couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more to the story. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I needed to know what I was dealing with. If this was some manipulation tactic, I'd sniff it out. If it wasn't, then I'd decide what to do next. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, the rain pounding on the roof. I could drive home, block her number, and let my lawyer handle the rest. Or I could hear her out, confront her one last time, and get to the bottom of whatever mess she was trying to clean up. Against my better judgment, I dialed her number. It rang twice before she answered, her voice breathless, like she'd been pacing the room waiting for me to call back. Thank you for calling me, she said quickly. I didn't know if you would. Stop wasting time, I snapped. Tell me what you meant about Connor. There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end, shaky and uneven. Connor's not just some guy from the volunteer project, she finally said. I didn't know it at first, but he's done this before. He goes after married women. I clench my jaw, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. How convenient, I said, sarcasm dripping from my words. So now he's the predator, and you're the victim? I'm not excusing what I did, she said quickly. I'm just telling you the truth. He knew exactly what to say, how to make me feel special, how to create a connection without me realizing what was happening. I was stupid. I let it happen. But he's dangerous. The last woman he did this to, her marriage didn't just end. Her life fell apart. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice hard. Why not before I caught you? Because I didn't see it until now, she whispered. I thought it was harmless, but then he started saying things, making plans, things that made me realize this wasn't just a fling to him. He's been planning something. I scoffed. Planning what? To sweep you off your feet and ride off into the sunset? Congratulations, Lisa. You found yourself a real prize. Please listen to me, she pleaded. He's been texting me nonstop since you kicked me out. He's not just letting it go. He's angry. Jealousy flared in me again, but it wasn't the same as before. This time it was mixed with something darker, unease. If she was telling the truth, then Connor wasn't just some guy playing games. He was someone who thrived on chaos and destruction, and I wasn't about to let him turn my life into his next playground. What do you expect me to do about it? I asked. You made your bed. Lie in it. Her breath hitched. I'm not asking you to take me back. I know that's not possible. I just want you to be careful. He knows where we live, and he's unpredictable. I leaned back in the seat, exhaling slowly. The rain continued to blur the world outside, but my mind was crystal clear. This wasn't over. Even if I never saw Lisa again, Connor was still out there, lurking like a shadow in the corner of my life. I'll handle it, I said finally, before ending the call. I sat there in silence for a few moments, weighing my options. Lisa had made her choices, and I wasn't going to be her savior. But if Connor thought he could toy with me the way he toyed with her, he was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't the kind of man who took betrayal lying down. No, this wasn't about winning Lisa back or salvaging what was left of my marriage. This was about making sure that Connor understood one simple fact. You don't mess with another man's life and walk away unscathed. I started the car, determination hardening inside me like steel. It was time to make sure Connor knew exactly who he was dealing with. I didn't drive home. Home didn't feel like a safe place right now. It felt like a crime scene, a hollow shell filled with memories I didn't want to confront yet. Instead, I pulled into the parking lot of the community center where Lisa had been volunteering. The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, casting everything in a gray haze that matched my mood. I sat in the car for a moment, watching the entrance, wondering if Connor would be inside. I didn't know what I was planning to do exactly, but I knew I wasn't leaving until I saw him, until I looked him in the eye and made sure he understood the mess he'd created. I wasn't going to let him disappear into the shadows and pretend none of this had happened. After a few minutes of hesitation, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance, my shoes splashing through puddles on the asphalt. The air was cold and damp, but I barely noticed. My mind was too busy playing out the confrontation in different ways, none of them ending peacefully. The volunteer coordinator of the front desk greeted me with a smile that quickly faded when she saw the look on my face. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "I'm looking for Connor," I said. My tone left no room for small talk. Her eyebrows knitted together in confusion. "Connor? He's not here today. Is something wrong?" Everything was wrong, but I didn't owe her an explanation. "Do you know where I can find him?" She hesitated, probably debating whether she should give out that kind of information to a man who looked like he was on the verge of tearing the place apart. But before she could decide, someone called out from behind me. "Looking for me?" I turned around and saw him, Connor, standing in the doorway of a side room, a clipboard tucked under one arm. He looked exactly how I imagined, mid-30s, athletic build, confident smirk. The kind of guy who probably thought he was irresistible, that he could take whatever he wanted without consequence. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm as I walked toward him. "We need to talk," I said. His smirk didn't falter. "Sure. Let's step outside." We walked back out into the parking lot, the rain tapping lightly against the cars around us. He leaned casually against the wall, as if this was just another ordinary day. It made my blood boil. Lisa told me everything, I said, cutting straight to the point. He didn't flinch. If anything, his smirk widened. Everything, huh? Did she tell you how much fun we had working together? The jealousy flared again, but I swallowed it down, refusing to let him see how deeply he'd gotten under my skin. Whatever game you think you're playing, it's over, I said. She's out of my life. You can have her, for all I care. But if you think you can keep messing with me, you're dead wrong. Connor chuckled, a low, mocking sound that made my hands itch to hit him. I'm not messing with you, man. I didn't force her to do anything. She came to me. I'm not here to argue about who started it, I said through gritted teeth. I'm here to warn you. Stay away from her. Stay away from my house. Don't even think about showing up near me again, or I promise you'll regret it. He pushed off the wall, taking a step closer, like he wanted to test how far he could push me. Big talk for a guy whose wife couldn't wait to run to someone else. Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe it's you. The words hit like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I took a step forward, closing the distance between us until we were eye to eye. You think you won because she chose you? You didn't win anything. She's a mess, and now you get to deal with her baggage. Congratulations. His smirk faltered just for a second. You're bluffing, he said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a dangerous whisper. I'm not bluffing. If I see you anywhere near her or me again, you'll find out exactly how serious I am. For a moment, neither of us moved. The tension crackled like static electricity, but I could see the shift in his demeanor. He wasn't as confident as he'd been 5 minutes ago. He realized I wasn't the kind of man who made empty threats. Finally, he stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. Fine, you've made your point. I didn't trust him, but I'd planted the seed of doubt, and that was enough for now. Without another word, I turned and walked back to my car, not bothering to look back. As I drove away, my mind raced with conflicting emotions, relief, anger, and a lingering sense of unfinished business. I didn't know if Connor would actually back off or if he'd find some new way to weasel his way back into our lives. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let him destroy anything else. Lisa had already done enough damage. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained a dull, overcast gray. I sat in the car for a moment, the engine still running, as if turning it off would make everything too real. My confrontation with Connor had drained me, but not in the way I expected. There was no sense of triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow ache that I couldn't shake. I shut off the engine and stepped out into the cold, damp air. The house loomed ahead of me, its familiar shape now alien. The place where we had built a life together, where laughter once echoed and routines had been comforting, was now just a building. For walls filled with ghosts I didn't want to face. Inside, the air was stale, and the silence pressed in from all sides. Lisa's things were still scattered around, like remnants of a life that had been abruptly cut short. Her shoes were by the door. Her favorite coffee mug sat on the counter. The throw blanket I'd stuffed into the closet earlier seemed to be calling to me, begging to be thrown out entirely. I walked past all of it and went straight to the bedroom. Her scent lingered on the pillows, faint but unmistakable, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. I yanked the sheets off the bed and bundled them into a pile, dragging them down the hallway like they were contaminated. The laundry room felt too close, too easy, so I stuffed them into a garbage bag instead. As I tied the bag shut, my phone buzzed on the counter. I hesitated, knowing it was probably her again. Sure enough, when I checked the screen, there were more messages waiting. Lisa, did you talk to him? Lisa, please tell me you're okay. Lisa, I'm scared, but I just want to make things right. I stared at the messages, my thumb hovering over the screen. A part of me wanted to block her number to cut off any remaining thread tying me to her. But another part of me, maybe the part that still remembered the good times, couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, I opened the chat and typed a single message. Stay away from me. It's over. I hit send and watched as the little delivered notification popped up, sealing the end of our conversation. There was nothing left to say. I had given her my trust, and she had shattered it. No amount of apologies or explanations could glue the pieces back together. The silence in the house felt heavier now, like it was settling in for the long haul. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet and poured myself a glass, not bothering with ice. The burn was sharp and immediate, but I welcomed it. I needed something to dull the noise in my head, to drown out the images of her with Connor, the lies she'd fed me, the memories that refused to let go. As I sat on the couch, sipping the whiskey, I thought about what came next. The divorce would be messy, no doubt. Splitting assets, dividing memories like property. None of it was going to be easy. But it was necessary. I wasn't going to be one of those men who clung to a broken marriage out of pride or fear of being alone. I'd rather start over from scratch than live with the constant reminder of her betrayal. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Lisa. It was a notification from my lawyer, confirming that the paperwork had been filed. A sense of finality washed over me, heavier than the weight of the whiskey in my hand. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the version of myself that had existed just a few weeks ago. The man who trusted too easily, who thought his life was stable, predictable. That version of me was gone, and in his place was someone harder, someone who had learned the cost of blind faith. I finished the glass and set it on the table, the warmth of the whiskey settling in my chest. The rain began again outside, tapping softly against the windows like a gentle reminder that life, no matter how messy, keeps moving forward. Lisa would be a chapter I'd close, a cautionary tale I'd remember but never revisit. Connor, if he was smart, would keep his distance. And me? I'd rebuild. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I'd find my footing again. For now, I just needed to sit with the silence, let it wash over me, and accept that sometimes endings aren't clean. They're jagged and painful, but they're necessary. And this ending, as messy as it was the only way forward. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the rain drown out everything else.